In the cold silence of the Tower of London, a young queen waits. She is only in her 30s. Outside her window, ravens circle the stone walls. Inside, the air smells of damp rock, old iron, and fear. In a few hours, Anne Boleyn will kneel on the scaffold. She will place her head on the block, and with one clean strike, her story will end. But this is not the story of her death. This is the story of how love became obsession, how ambition became a trap, and how a crown became a curse. Tonight, let us slowly return to the beginning, to a time when Anne was not a queen, but a clever, captivating young woman returning to England from the sophisticated courts of France. She was different. Her style, her wit, her sharp intelligence, it all set her apart. While other ladies of the court were quiet and obedient, Anne was bold. She had dark, mesmerizing eyes that could challenge a king. Picture this: England, the early 1500s. On the surface, everything seems calm, orderly. The Tudor dynasty is secure, and at its head is the young, handsome, and powerful King Henry VIII. By his side is his queen, Catherine of Aragon. She's a Spanish princess, the daughter of the legendary Ferdinand and Isabella. She is everything a queen should be: pious, dignified, and fiercely loyal to her husband and her adopted country. For over 2 decades, she has been the very model of a queen consort. She's ridden into battle for Henry, advised him on matters of state, and held the court together with her grace. The people love her, the court respects her, but behind the tapestries and down the long, cold corridors of Greenwich Palace, a shadow is growing. A problem that has been gnawing at the heart of the monarchy for 20 years. A problem that all the power and wealth in the world couldn't solve. Catherine had one job, one fundamental duty that trumped all others: to provide a male heir to the throne. And in this, she had failed, again and again. It wasn't for lack of trying. She endured pregnancy after pregnancy. There was a son, Prince Henry, born on New Year's Day, 1511. The celebrations were immense. Tournaments were held. Bells were rung across the kingdom. England finally had its future king. But just 52 days later, the baby boy was dead. The joy turned to ashes. After that came a heartbreaking series of miscarriages and stillbirths. Only one child survived to adulthood, a healthy, intelligent girl named Mary. But in the brutal world of 16th century politics, a female ruler was seen as a recipe for disaster, for weakness, for civil war. The Wars of the Roses were still a fresh, bloody memory. The Tudor claim to the throne was new, and Henry believed only a son could secure it. As the years passed, Henry's frustration festered into a dark obsession. He was a deeply religious man, and he started to search for a reason, a sign from God. He found one in the Bible, in the book of Leviticus. If a man shall take his brother's wife, it is an unclean thing. They shall be childless. Before marrying Henry, Catherine had been briefly married to his older brother, Arthur. Arthur had died, and a special permission, a dispensation from the Pope, was granted for Henry to marry Catherine. At the time, it was a smart political move. But now, decades later, with a string of dead babies, and only a daughter to show for it, Henry saw it not as a political solution, but as a biblical curse. He became convinced that his marriage was invalid in the eyes of God, that he was living in sin, and that God was punishing him by denying him a son. The court was a place of whispers. Everyone knew the king's great matter. Everyone felt the tension. England was a ship sailing on a calm sea, but the captain was growing desperate, and a storm was gathering on the horizon. The kingdom was holding its breath, waiting for something or someone to break the deadlock. And into this charged atmosphere, this royal crisis of faith and dynasty, walked a young woman named Anne Boleyn. She wasn't just another pretty face at court. She was something entirely new. Anne was the daughter of an ambitious diplomat, Sir Thomas Boleyn. She wasn't royalty, but she was well connected. More importantly, she was unlike anyone the English court had ever seen. While the ideal English lady was fair, blonde, and demure, Anne was dark and striking. She had glossy black hair, piercing dark eyes, and an olive complexion. People didn't call her the most beautiful woman at court, but they all agreed she was captivating. Her real power wasn't in her looks, but in her mind and her spirit. Unlike other English ladies, Anne hadn't spent her youth in a quiet country manor. She'd been sent to the continent to serve in the most sophisticated and cutting-edge courts in Europe. First, in the Netherlands, under the Regent Margaret of Austria, a powerful and educated female ruler. Then, most influentially, she went to France. The French court was the epicenter of the Renaissance. It was a world of art, music, intellectual debate, and fashionable intrigue. French women were not expected to be silent decorations. They were educated, they debated politics and religion, they dressed with impeccable style, and they knew how to use their wit and charm as weapons, and absorbed it all. She learned to speak French fluently, to debate theology, to dance with grace, and to dress in the latest French fashions, which made her stand out dramatically when she returned to the more conservative English court. She had a sharp tongue, a quick wit, and a self-confidence that bordered on arrogance. She wasn't afraid to speak her mind, to challenge men in conversation, and to carry herself not as a servant, but as an equal. When Henry VIII first laid eyes on her, he was intrigued. He was used to women who were either his wife, bound by duty, or his mistresses who were available for the taking. His current mistress was actually Anne's own sister, Mary Boleyn. So when the king's attention turned to Anne, everyone, including Henry himself, expected a familiar story to unfold. He would shower her with gifts, write her letters, and she would eventually yield and become his new lover. It was the way of the world, the way of a king. Henry sent her jewels, wrote her passionate love letters, and made his intentions clear. He was the most powerful man in England. Who could possibly refuse him? Anne Boleyn. That's who. In a move of breathtaking audacity, she said no. She flatly refused to become his mistress. She returned his gifts. She told him that her virtue was her most prized possession, and she would not surrender it for anyone, not even the king. She had seen what happened to discarded mistresses, including her own sister. They were used and then cast aside, their reputations ruined. Anne wanted more. She wasn't interested in being a temporary amusement. She told the king, "I would rather lose my life than my honesty." This wasn't a coy game of playing hard to get. This was a radical, almost unthinkable declaration of self-worth. By refusing to sleep with him, she completely upended the power dynamic. Suddenly, the all-powerful king couldn't get what he wanted. The more she resisted, the more he became obsessed. His initial attraction deepened into an all-consuming passion. This single act of refusal, this one woman's determination to set her own terms, lit a fuse. Henry, already convinced his marriage to Catherine was a sham, now saw a solution. If he couldn't have Anne as his mistress, he would have her as his wife. He would make her his queen, and to do that, he would have to do the unthinkable. divorce Catherine, defy the Pope, and break England away from the Church that had governed European spiritual life for 1,000 years. Anne's no did more than just captivate a king. It set in motion a chain of events that would lead to the English Reformation. It would change the course of religion, politics, and the very identity of a nation. It all began not with a battle or a treaty, but with a clever, ambitious woman who looked a king in the eye and dared to refuse him. The quiet court of Henry VIII was about to be turned upside down, and Anne Boleyn was the one who would do it. Thanks so much for watching. If you're fascinated by the Tudors, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss our next chapter in this incredible story. See you next time. In 1533, Anne Boleyn's wildest dreams came true. She was crowned Queen of England, and her coronation was a spectacle of unparalleled magnificence. Draped in ermine and purple velvet, she processed through the streets of London, a vision of triumph. The crown, heavy with jewels and history, was placed upon her head in Westminster Abbey. She had won. She had climbed to the very pinnacle of power, but the weight of that crown was more than just physical. It was the weight of a nation's resentment. From the moment she became queen, Anne was an outsider. The people of England didn't see a radiant new monarch. They saw the woman who had displaced their beloved Catherine of Aragon. They didn't cheer for her. They muttered curses under their breath. In the taverns and markets, they called her the great whore and a witch. They whispered that she had used sorcery to bewitch the king, ensnaring him in a web of dark magic to satisfy her ambition. They blamed her for everything, for the break with the Pope in Rome, for the religious turmoil, for the poor harvests. Every hardship the country faced was laid at her feet. This chilling reception wasn't confined to the streets. Even within the gilded halls of the palace, she was isolated. The old noble families who had supported Catherine now looked at Anne with contempt. Courtiers who had once vied for her attention now gave her cold shoulders and plotted in shadowy corners. She was the queen, but she was utterly alone, surrounded by enemies who smiled to her face and sharpened their knives behind her back. Every step she took was scrutinized. Every word she spoke was twisted. The pressure was immense. She had staked everything on one single promise to the king. And then came the moment that was meant to secure her reign, the moment that would silence all her critics and solidify her dynasty. She gave birth. The whole kingdom held its breath, waiting for a prince, an heir to the Tudor throne. But when the baby's cries echoed through the chamber, it was not the son Henry so desperately craved. It was a daughter. A healthy, red-haired, fiery little girl they named Elizabeth. For Anne, this was not just a disappointment, it was a disaster. She had failed to deliver on her most crucial promise. She had given the king another daughter, just as Catherine had. In that moment, the first cracks in her golden world began to appear, and the heavy crown on her head began to feel like a death sentence. Henry's infatuation, the all-consuming passion that had reshaped a kingdom, began to curdle. The birth of a daughter was a blow, but Anne was still young. There was still time. She became pregnant again, and hope flickered back to life. But it was not to be. She suffered a miscarriage, and then another, and then a final devastating loss, a boy born too soon. With each loss, a piece of Henry's affection withered and died. The man who had moved heaven and earth to have her now looked at her with a chilling indifference. The warmth in his eyes was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating gaze that no longer saw his queen, but an obstacle. His eyes, once fixed solely on Anne, began to wander, and they landed on a new target, a woman who was everything Anne was not, Jane Seymour. She was quiet, gentle, and submissive. Where Anne was fiery and outspoken, Jane was meek and demure. Henry started spending more and more time with her, showering her with gifts and public affection. The court, sensing the shift in the wind, flocked to Jane, leaving him even more isolated than before. Anne was not one to suffer in silence. She was a fighter. She confronted Henry. She argued with him, her voice sharp with desperation and jealousy. She demanded the loyalty he had sworn to her. In front of the entire court, she railed against his infidelity, her words bold and reckless. But this was no longer the early days of their courtship. This was a court filled with her enemies, all listening, all waiting for her to make a fatal mistake. And her bold words, her refusal to be a quiet, cast-aside wife, were exactly that. She was no longer a bewitching lover. She was a nagging shrew. Her enemies seized their chance. Led by the calculating Thomas Cromwell, they began to build a case against her. The whispers that had once been confined to the streets now echoed in the king's private chambers. But they were no longer about witchcraft. The charges were far more specific and far more lethal. They accused her of adultery with 5 men, including her own brother. The charges were monstrous: incest, treason, plotting the king's death. It was a web of lies, a fabrication spun from a few careless words, a flirtatious glance, and the court's deep-seated hatred for her. But in Tudor England, the truth didn't matter. All that mattered was what the king wanted to believe. And Henry, desperate for a new wife who could give him a son, was ready to believe the absolute worst. The trap had been set, and Anne Boleyn, the queen, who had once been untouchable, was about to walk right into it. Her downfall would be as swift and brutal as her rise had been spectacular. So, how does a queen become a prisoner? For Anne Boleyn, it was a shockingly swift fall. Picture this: the very same place she entered in triumph for her coronation, the Tower of London. She now re-enters through the Traitor's Gate, a prisoner accused of the most heinous crimes. Her trial was nothing more than a carefully staged play, a piece of political theater where the ending was written before the first act even began. Imagine the scene: Anne, once the most powerful woman in England, standing alone, facing a court of men who were either her enemies or too terrified of the king to speak the truth. The charges against her were sensational, scandalous, and almost certainly fabricated. Adultery with 5 men, including her own brother. Incest, treason. It was a smear campaign designed to do one thing: get her out of the way so Henry could marry Jane Seymour. The evidence presented was flimsy, based on rumors, coerced confessions, and outright lies. Think about the pressure in that room. The judges, the jury, they all knew what the king wanted. Even her own uncle, the Duke of Norfolk, sat on the commission that tried her. Family loyalty meant nothing when power and survival were on the line. The verdict was a foregone conclusion: guilty. Before the trial had even properly concluded, The judgment was known. Anne was condemned to be burned or beheaded at the king's pleasure. Her supposed lovers, including her brother George, were also sentenced to death. It was a brutal, efficient annihilation of Anne and her entire faction. An axe could be messy, sometimes requiring multiple strikes. She walked with composure from her rooms in the tower to the specially built scaffold. It was a private affair, witnessed by only a select few officials and nobles. Her final speech is one of the most remarkable things about her story. There was no rage, no final curse against the king who had destroyed her. Instead, her words were measured, dignified, and incredibly poignant. She asked the crowd to pray for her, and she spoke gently of the king. She said, "I pray God save the king and send him long to reign over you, for a gentler nor a more merciful prince was there never. And to me he was ever a good, a gentle and sovereign lord." Why would she say this? Was she still in love with him? Unlikely. Was she protecting her daughter, Elizabeth, ensuring the king wouldn't turn his wrath on her? It was her final, masterful political move. After her speech, she knelt. Her ladies removed her ermine mantle and headdress. She tied a blindfold over her eyes. The French swordsman, to distract her, purportedly called out, "Where is my sword?" Her body was placed in an old arrow chest and buried in an unmarked grave in the Tower-S chapel. It was a shockingly ignominious end for a queen. The very next day, King Henry VIII became betrothed to Jane Seymour. He married her just 10 days later. It seemed as though Anne had been erased, but history has a funny way of remembering. Her legacy lived on, most powerfully through her daughter. The little girl she was forced to leave behind would one day become Queen Elizabeth I, one of England's greatest monarchs. The Boleyn bloodline, which Henry so desperately tried to extinguish, ended up ruling England for over 40 years, defining an entire era. Anne's story is a powerful reminder of how quickly fortunes can change, and how, even in death, a legacy can endure and triumph. In the cold, unforgiving stone of the Tower of London, a queen prepares to die. Not for treason, not for infidelity, but for a crime far greater in the eyes of a tyrant king. She had failed to produce a son. This is the story of Anne Boleyn, but it's not the one you think you know. Forget the caricatures, the six-fingered monster of Tudor propaganda. Today, we uncover the woman who didn't just wear a crown, but who single-handedly redrew the map of England's faith and future. She was a woman of fierce intellect, sharp wit, and a political mind that rivaled any man at court. She played the game of thrones and won, capturing the heart of a king so utterly that he broke with 1,000 years of tradition, severed ties with Rome, and declared himself the head of a new church, all for her. But the same ambition that carried her to the throne would also lead her to the scaffold. Let's rewind. Before she was a queen, Anne was a lady-in-waiting, returning from the sophisticated courts of France. She was unlike any woman Henry VIII had ever met. She wasn't just beautiful, she was captivating. While other ladies were demure and obedient, Anne was bold. She challenged Henry, debated with him, and refused to become his mistress. This wasn't just a coy game. It was a masterclass in power dynamics. For 7 long years, Henry pursued her, his obsession growing with every refusal. He wrote her passionate love letters, showering her with gifts and promises. He offered her everything a woman could want, except the one thing she demanded, the crown. Anne knew her value. She saw an opportunity, not just for herself, but for the religious reform she believed in. She wasn't just a homewrecker. She was a revolutionary, armed with forbidden Protestant texts and a vision for a new England. The great matter, as Henry's quest for a divorce from Catherine of Aragon was known, consumed the kingdom. Catherine was a Spanish princess, a devout Catholic, and the aunt of the Holy Roman Emperor. Divorcing her was not just a personal affair, it was a geopolitical earthquake. The Pope, under the Emperor's thumb, refused. For years, the stalemate held, but Anne's influence over Henry was absolute. She whispered ideas of religious independence, of an English church for the English people with the king at its head. It was a radical, dangerous idea, but for a king desperate for a male heir and besotted with a woman who promised him one, it was irresistible. In 1533, the break was made. Henry divorced Catherine, married a pregnant Anne Boleyn, and was excommunicated by the Pope. The English Reformation had begun, not in a blaze of theological debate, but in the crucible of a king's desire. Anne was crowned Queen of England, the architect of her own destiny. She had one, or so it seemed. The cheers of the coronation soon faded, replaced by the hushed whispers of a court that never truly accepted her. The people, loyal to Queen Catherine, called her the Great Whore. The old nobility saw her as an upstart. But Anne's most pressing problem was biological. In September 1533, she gave birth. The child was healthy, intelligent, and strong. But it was a girl, Elizabeth. For Henry, who had torn his kingdom apart for a son, it was a bitter disappointment. Anne's position, once seemingly unassailable, was now precarious. She promised Henry a son next time, and he believed her. But pregnancies ended in miscarriages, and the king's patience, never a deep well, began to run dry. His eye started to wander, first to one of Anne's ladies in waiting, and then to another, the quiet and gentle Jane Seymour. The final act of this tragedy unfolded with breathtaking speed. By early 1536, Henry was desperate. His obsession with Anne had curdled into resentment. He needed a legitimate excuse to get rid of her, and his chief minister, Thomas Cromwell, a man Anne had helped bring to power, was all too willing to provide it. The plot was as diabolical as it was brilliant. They couldn't accuse her of failing to produce an heir, so they accused her of the most heinous crimes imaginable: adultery with 5 men, including her own brother, incest, and plotting the king's death. It was a fiction, a tapestry of lies woven to justify a judicial murder. One by one, the accused men were arrested, interrogated, and tortured. Under duress, a musician named Mark Smeaton confessed to adultery with the Queen. It was all Cromwell needed. The other men, including Anne's brother George, went to their deaths proclaiming their innocence, and Anne's, but it didn't matter. The verdict was a foregone conclusion. On May 19, 1536, less than 3 years after her coronation, Anne Boleyn walked to a scaffold erected within the walls of the Tower of London. She was spared the common axe, granted the mercy of a skilled swordsman summoned from France. She addressed the small crowd with a speech of remarkable dignity and courage. She did not confess to the crimes, but neither did she blame the king, knowing any defiance would endanger her daughter, Elizabeth. She asked for prayers, commended her soul to God, and knelt down with a single swift stroke. The 1,000 days of Anne Boleyn's reign were over. Her name was scrubbed from records, her portraits destroyed, her badges removed. Henry married Jane Seymour just 11 days later. It was as if she had never existed. The king had his blank slate, but history has a strange sense of justice. The irony is almost poetic. Anne Boleyn died as a disgraced queen, executed on false charges, her memory systematically erased. But her daughter lived. That little girl, declared illegitimate and cast aside, would inherit the throne her mother had fought so desperately for. Elizabeth I would become one of the greatest, most beloved monarchs England has ever known. She would rule for over 44 years, her reign a golden age of culture, exploration, and national pride. She would embody all the qualities her mother possessed: the sharp intellect, the political savvy, the unbreakable will. The mother was erased from the official record, but the daughter ruled with her spirit. History forgot Anne's voice, but it could never, ever forget her bloodline. And so we come to the heart of the matter. This is the truth that echoes through the centuries, long after the swords have rusted and the stones have crumbled. Anne Boleyn did not lose her head because she was guilty. She lost it because she mattered. She lost it because she changed a king, bending his will to her own. She lost it because she changed a church, sparking a reformation that redefined a nation's soul. She lost it because she irrevocably changed the course of history itself. And in the end, the crown she fought for, the crown she bled for, was never meant to save her. It was only ever meant to destroy her. Now, let the ravens of the tower rest. Let the ancient stones sleep, and let the tragic, triumphant story of Anne Boleyn fade slowly into silence.